Sometimes I feel as if I at least know about every RPG out there. I mean, it's my favorite genre after all, so it's only reasonable that I'd be aware of most of the games surrounding it. See guys, I play good shit, like Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, Pokemon Black and White, Deltarune, and Persona 5. Really though, whenever I reflect a bit, I'm kind of ashamed that I didn't explore as much of the genre as a kid as I wished I did. I didn't get into Dragon Quest until about 2020, I only ever played Final Fantasy 1 and 6 growing up and didn't try some of the others until recently, and the only Fire Emblem games I played were the ones on the 3DS till this past year. Being emulation illiterate really does that to someone. I'm still happy with what I did end up playing, but I hope I'm not alone in saying that there are some games that eluded me in my childhood that I wished I got to experience then. When I went shopping with my parents as a kid, I'd often check out the game aisles while they were doing the busy work because yeah, I was one of those kids. Every time I went there were always the same handful of games on display that I was always curious about, yet wouldn't end up playing myself until much later. Shin Megami Tensei 4 was the one that stuck out to me the most. Now with that said, I wasn't familiar with Megaton yet. I think out of most RPG series, SMT didn't really have a foothold outside of its demographic until the past few years or so. Either that or I'm living under a humongous rock. It wasn't until one day I was very bored and doom scrolling through Wikipedia that I found out that Persona spun off from it, which blew my mind because, yeah, I knew what Persona was at this point. And no, my first exposure to the series was seeing videos about 4 every now and then, not 5. I'm not a complete loser. So, knowing that game that I'd see every now and then while at the store or browsing the eShop with only 24 cents on my account was in fact related to a series I already knew about, only made my imagination run more wild than before. For all those years, I kind of imagined it as something like Fire Emblem, seeing as it appeared to take place in some sort of medieval setting, but I wouldn't see any gameplay of it until I did something unlike your typical Atlas fan and played it myself. After playing Persona 3 and 5 in early 2023 for myself, I figured I should give the main series a glance as I'm always willing to try out something unfamiliar, and I wanted to put this decade-long curiosity to rest. What resulted after that first playthrough was a giant melting pot of emotions that ended up making me interested in the rest of the series to the point where it's actually my favorite of the 3 big names I mentioned previously. There's a lot to unpack here, but my Megaton poisoning is the only thing to come close to matching my Resident Evil brain rot of 2021, and it all stems from this stupid, innocuous 3DS game that repeatedly subverted my expectations as to what it could possibly be about. I know this is a lot of people's introduction to mainline Megaton, and yet despite all of that buzz surrounding it, there's so many finer details that got lost amidst that discussion that I hope to bring some light to. So God help me, let me see if I can answer what this game is.
Hey, wake up. If we're not on our way soon, we'll be late.
As with all good video games, we open waking up to our friend voiced by Bryce Papenbrook. Exactly like Danganronpa 2. This is Issachar, and along with our main character Flynn, they're traveling to the eastern kingdom of Mikado to take part in the gauntlet rite to become samurai who protect the kingdom from demons. Issachar fails the rite due to being born with the misfortune of not being a silent protagonist. Meanwhile, Flynn is chosen and cements himself as the only dude this side of the firmament to successfully pull off a ponytail. He meets fellow samurai Jonathan and Walter, the former being a luxurer, the upper class of society, and the latter being a casualty who are of lower class and therefore looked down upon by some luxurers, as well as Isabeau, another luxurer. Throughout their training, the 4 become butt buddies and eventually learn of the Black Samurai, a masked figure on a strange journey to distribute books across the kingdom that end up turning the citizens who read them into demons. Together, the 4 pursue her into the domain of the Unclean Ones beneath the depths of Mikado and uncover a world wholly unfamiliar to their own, where their worldviews and alignments will be put into question. SMT as a series is not a stranger to world building. I mean, I hope it's not, because it's an RPG after all, but I found 4's approach to it to be the most interesting by far. While the other games are quick to throw you into the thick of it with their hostile and post-apocalyptic environments, 4 takes more time to settle you into things if you ignore how badly the demons in Naruto want to see your intestines fly. Mikado is a very different locale for the series, but one that is more than likely familiar to those coming off the heels of other RPGs, which I think partially explains why this seems to be a lot of people's first entry in mainline Megaton. The storytelling in general is also more in line with standard RPGs because you're traveling with friends. This is juxtaposed to other SMTs where the alignment representatives are either distant or already outwardly hostile to one another. 4 4, on the other hand, Jonathan keeps his social and political opinions to himself for long enough that the party is able to build a good relationship, making the moment where it all starts to crash down all the more impactful. There's a lot that we need to unravel before that point though that ends up contributing to that greater picture. So for those unaware, SMT is known online as the only source of developing more balls. These games are often framed as borderline masochistic, or perhaps the Dark Souls of RPGs, and if you actually played the games, you'd realize that's less of a fact and more so evidence that people really don't know how to play RPGs without instant win buttons. SMT4 follows in the footsteps of its predecessors by including the press-turn combat system introduced in Nocturne. I'm going to assume this isn't the first explanation you're going to listen to, so I'm going to try and keep this brief so we can focus on what makes this iteration of the style different. Essentially, you get a press-turn icon for each combatant deployed. Attacking normally uses up a turn, meanwhile exploiting a weakness, passing your turn, or getting a critical hit causes an icon to start glowing, allowing it to be used one more time. On the flip side, missing an attack uses up 2 icons, and same goes for hitting an enemy with an element that they null. A worst case scenario, they drain or reflect that element, and then your whole turn disappears faster than the average SMT fan when the shower gets brought into the equation. It's easy to understand on paper, however, what makes it interesting is that the ways you can use it change depending on the boss you're fighting or your party composition. At max, you can have 8 actions in a single turn, however, that's only if you exploit weaknesses. Sometimes you'll have to weigh up healing, setting up buffs and debuffs when they get reset. It's a really flexible battle system in each game it's in, and it highlights a chaotic and dynamic skirmish. However, I notice a lot of people who play this as their first game think this is the peak of combat, but, and I say this as someone who's played a good chunk of these games, dog, I ain't gonna lie, this isn't even in the top 5. In order to innovate on a battle system that was already considered good, SMT4 introduces the new smirking mechanic that was only welcome here and in Apocalypse. And for a very good reason. Actually, no, I wouldn't even say it's welcome here. Fuck you, smirking. Smirking is a status that can occur when somebody exploits a weakness, lands a crit, or nulls an attack. This essentially gives you the power of God at your fingertips. You get an attack boost, radically increased crit chances, and boosted evasion, which is not only completely overkill, but the way you get this status is by doing things that press turn already rewards you for doing. And it goes both ways too, so imagine an enemy gets a crit on you, so you're already reeling from taking collision from a freight train head on, and it's going to get another action because, you know, it got a crit. But now that that same enemy is smirking, it's pretty much impossible to fight back, so you're more than likely going to have to take another freight train hit, which gives the enemy yet another action because that was probably a crit as well. It's a totally redundant addition and turns an otherwise strategic battle system into a circus. You can have encounters where neither party smirks, and then right at the end, the boss gets a crit off that causes them to smirk, which is only going to make the next action harder to deal with and potentially cost you the whole fight. It's not really something you can take advantage of yourself either due to its random nature. I mean, sometimes if I don't have effective moves, I'll roll for the crit with a regular attack, but there's no strategy in actually utilizing the mechanic itself outside of that. It's like Trance in FF9, the boner of RPG mechanics, where it comes up at the most inopportune times, so you never know how to effectively use it yourself, except in this case, the enemies have access to it as well. This is a lot more damning on bosses that are physical, since magic can't crit and therefore score more actions, so I feel like the further you get into the game and the more control you have over your party composition and covering for weaknesses, the less dangerous smirking becomes. But early game, one smirk and it's over. The most noteworthy example of the problems with smirking comes from the infamous Minotaur fight. Minotaur is this game's equivalent of Matador from Nocturne. Matador was a skill check fight that comes out of nowhere to test your party composition. Online, he's framed as impossibly hard due to his boons like really high evasion and strong attacks. However, with the use of buffs and elemental resistances, he's kind of a pushover and more of a lesson as to what to expect going forward. Minotaur is like if Matador was racist. He's an absolute RNG hellhole, but I guess you could say that makes him a good teacher for this game as well. Let's not get things twisted, because on a narrative level, Minotaur kicks ass. He's built up as a big guardian separating Naruku from the realm of the unclean ones, and Naruku is already a punishing enough area for a starting dungeon in an RPG, so you know the boss down here means business. He's got a design that warrants being some mascot for a hot dog brand, and this is the first boss fight in the game that plays Battle B2, the major boss theme in the game, and it's so badass that the number of views it has on YouTube is higher than the sales of this game will ever be. All of this is perfectly fitting because he's He's a physical beast with strong and accurate attacks. Labor Strike makes it look like a chicken got on the bottom screen, and you're practically guaranteed to at least deal with one smirk from him. Hell, you're not even safe from turn 1 due to your AI companions and your fellow samurai. You don't choose who you want to bring to the fight. This means the game can give you fucking Walter, who primarily uses fire magic that Oscar Mayer over here just so happens to be immune to, so this means Walter can be a liability and make him smirk and kill your chances of winning before you even start. And the best part, I spent this whole paragraph ranting about this fight and then beat him on my first try when getting footage, so I can't demonstrate the full annoyance of it. Even when I'm winning, he's still finding ways to hurt me. I recommend fusing Fortuna for this, cause she's got both Medea and Sukukaja, making for a reliable dodge tank setup. Bro, are we dead ass? My playthrough probably isn't demonstrating it well enough, so I'm gonna splice some footage of Medusa in here instead and hope you buy it. That fight is probably harder for me now since it's not as memorable, therefore I don't prepare for it as much, but overall I do think things begin to ease up after that point. But once you find a boss's weak point, the strategy typically ends up being pushing that weakness to its limit and reeling back when you need to heal or reapply cancelled buffs. Late game fights are dictated more by elemental affinities if the bosses don't have weaknesses, so I think those can end up being a little more interesting since they require you to reorganize your party and potentially fuse new demons. King Kenji is kind of an ass, also due to his Megaton press spam, but I just countered that with Tetracorn and I think it worked pretty well. Don't read me wrong though, there are other elements of the gameplay past this point that still make survival akin to walking through the perfume department. Flynn himself can carry a lot of fights due to how flexible he is. When one of his demons learns off their abilities, Flynn can learn their moves through demon whispering, the only exceptions being passive abilities. What he has access to is more than enough to get by though. His uses of spells do cost more MP when first passed over, but his stat distribution is completely customizable too, so I tend to prefer dumping everything into agility and magic. I know dexterity can be the most destructive build, but that requires spending money to buy guns, and honestly, I doubt with that much aura Flynn would even pass a background check. I want to touch on this in a little bit, but money is a lot tighter in comparison to most other SMTs due to how it's not really distributed through most battles, so I end up being more thrifty with it, and magic ends up being a more cost-effective build in the long run. It gets to the point where Flynn alone is able to nuke a lot of late game bosses. By the time you get concentrate, the game might as well be over. You really can't blame me for getting gaslit into doing a magic build for every one of these games. In conjunction with the app that allows you to regenerate MP by going for a little jog, you eventually never have to worry about that resource ever again. You get app points upon level up or by finding app cards in the environment and can use them to purchase permanent upgrades in the form of apps. These aren't crypto miners, they include the aforementioned regeneration abilities, Demon Lingual, which allows you to understand certain unintelligible demons, Auto Pinpoint, which makes the auto battle command target enemy weaknesses and turns normal encounters into a cinch, discounts on summoning because man, this economy is fucked, and extra stock for more demons. As much as I like the app system, I can't help but feel like I end up falling back on the same upgrades every time because, simply put, the ones I just mentioned are the best. What's the point in getting HP regeneration when MP is more flexible and still will let you infinitely heal provided you have a spell for it? I can't think of a single instance in which something like the mid-battle Demon Fusion app is ever useful since it gives you less options than normal fusion, and in what situation are you ever going to need to fuse something mid-battle for a lesser result? Again, I do overall like this system, but of the 3 playthroughs I've done, I find myself on the same ones every time, and anything I pick up after that point is kind of a second thought. I've been talking about demons so much at this point, you'd think I was a Nintendo fan talking about mediocre sports games, but I'm actually referring to the Demon Fusion the series is well known for. Negotiation is freaking hilarious in this game because I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like the demons are bigger assholes this time around. Noriku is already a pretty cruel opening, especially if you're new to the series like I was on my first playthrough, and with emotional manipulators like this, it feels like Hope is throwing you into a piranha plant butt naked while you're on your period. I was supposed to say piranha pit in that last sentence, but there's no way you can get me to re-record that. I don't have any source for this, but I've heard that demon negotiation is influenced by your luck stat or something like that. I'm willing to buy that explanation since demons don't seem to react consistently to the same responses twice, unlike in, say, Persona 1 and 2. I run these conversations off of breadcrumbs and a prayer, but when they start asking for stuff, you gotta know how much to butter them up and when to just put your foot down because they will just casually swindle you out of your belongings if you're not careful. Thankfully for me, I was raised off of Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, so I know how to lowball sad sacks. Something I don't see discussed enough when it comes to the demons in this game, however, is the fusion aspect. While the Cathedral of Shadows in this game does have good options to sort out the type of demon you're looking for, and I just overall love the interface, unfortunately, the demons themselves suffer from pretty lazy stat distribution. There are more than a handful of instances of one number being copied between each stat, and unfortunately, as you get further into the game and your options start getting more powerful, it eventually gets to the point where you just pass similar moves into each demon you fuse. It ends up homogenizing a lot of them, and I don't know how many people will agree with me on this, but I never felt that way with a lot of the other Megatons. It's fine early on when you will genuinely struggle, it's just during the last fourth or so, I stopped paying attention much to stats during fusion unless if what I'm fusing has bad affinities or low MP. I don't think demon building is terrible or anything, because there is some good decision making to be had with all the abilities on offer, and how smart decision making can help you pass resistance abilities to patch up weaknesses on stronger demons. Plus, since some EXP gets passed on to everyone after a fight, you're encouraged to build up a huge party that's constantly growing and get a large amount of fusion options all at once. Also, this detail in the menu where some demon portraits slide into view from different sides of the screen caught my eye, and I just thought you'd appreciate it if I mentioned that. That's pretty much all the essentials covered, and with the descriptions I gave each, you'd be inclined to believe this game is a mixed bag. And to some, that's exactly what it is. The combat is pretty straightforward once you understand the intricacies of press turn, yet you can easily get screwed over with one bad instance of RNG. Demon fusion is fun, but demons blend into one another due in part to how their stats are spread, and Flynn maybe has two builds you should always default to, despite how much fine-tuning you can do with him. If I were to rank these games purely on combat mechanics, it would probably look a little something like this. In other words, I think SMT4 sucks! I don't think any SMT game captures world building the same way this one does. Megaton has always been known for its locales, from the Vortex world and how you're isolated from humanity as the Demi-Fiend's very own dwindles away and it feels like there's a new demon around every corner wanting to beat you up and take your lunch money. The Schwarzwald's endless hostility reminding humanity of their sins towards the planet. Dot and how unfavorably it compares to the Vortex world. SMT4 spends its entire opening showcasing the life of a samurai in Mikado, and you'll be quick to raise a lot of questions such as why it seems like a place lifted directly from the Middle Ages still has advanced technology. I mean, we literally find a gun.
Is that what I think it is?
Oh no, it's a gun!
Prior fans of the series would be able to clue in that we'll come across a post-apocalyptic Tokyo somehow, but it's how those oddities begin to add and build up to the reveal that make it an impactful one regardless. And they go the extra mile too. Mikado is mostly navigated through menus that can lead to bigger locations you freely roam around in, almost like something from a classic RPG. However, the second you step foot into Tokyo, this structure is thrown out in favor of the traditional SMT map, and exploration is no longer designated exclusively towards major areas. There's a surprising amount of interconnected areas throughout Tokyo to help really engross you in this unfamiliar environment. I think most SMTs do a good job at making you feel out of your league through difficulty and atmosphere, but despite the balancing issues I rambled on about earlier, this might just be the most effective example of that. Everyone in your party is completely ignorant of how this side of the world works due to how cut off Mikado is in an effort to remain pure from the unclean ones. It sells the idea that you're a fish out of water and highlights the chaotic and dangerous nature of the city more than it would otherwise. Who is touching me? What the fuck is your problem? A minor thing I don't see enough people bring up is how Maka is distributed in this game. Most enemies don't drop the common currency. The way you make money is by picking up relics scattered across the environment to turn around and sell for pennies. I also find it lucrative to sell unused items and equipment since the item caps vary, and you're likely to hit those caps very frequently. It's a small addition that literally nobody brings up, but I think in this case, such a restriction encourages me to actually think about how I use my items. Meanwhile, without it, I'd probably be sitting on 90 bead chains that I'm never going to use because what can I say? I might need them later. Money may be a little too tight, though. Don't make a US economy joke. Don't make a US economy joke. Don't make a US economy joke. I specifically made sure to save up as much money as I could this playthrough, partially because buying demons back from the compendium is like buying amiibos in a post-tariff America. Oh, damn it! And also because of this inhumane black card side quest required for neutral that asks for your life savings, the 3 numbers on the back of your credit card, and your 3 remaining fingers. Like I said earlier, this only makes me lean towards magic more, since I don't believe there are any weapons that increase magic, therefore you don't have to worry about upgrading your weaponry. There's this egregiously evil shoppers district that you can only gain access to after obtaining the previously mentioned black card, and there's this shop here that has so much badass equipment, including the interesting adventure Demonica. It's nothing more than a tease, however, as you just burned a canyon into your wallet getting the privilege to step into this place to begin with, and now you're too much of a poron to ever hope to afford it. I do adore that feeling of scrounging around for whatever you can get your hands on though, and trying to find untouched pockets of the world and seeing how they all seamlessly connect together. And this was on the 3DS, mind you. Growing up with this system, I always wondered why there weren't more games, specifically RPGs, that had open 3D environments to explore with a rotatable camera and all that jazz. Well, you can probably blame that last part on this thing, but it's funny that out of every game I played on the handheld, Fire Emblem Echoes was the only game I played that gave me exactly what I wanted. And mind you, I used to hate this game back whenever I had bad opinions. Little was I aware, Atlas was out here actually pushing the system so early into its lifespan, and hardly anybody else matched them. There's no marking telling you where you have to go next when you reach Tokyo, so it's really easy to get lost if certain pieces of dialogue aren't registering with you, and in general the place can be hard to navigate, what with all the poison spots littering the map like human feces in California. This is something the sequel, SMT4 Apocalypse, amended by having an objective marker displayed so you won't get lost, but even though I do find it frustrating to have to look up a guide every now and then after wandering around for 5 hours not knowing where to go, I can't help but feel like something was lost in translation. Not about to turn this into a whole spiel about how that game caused an SMT4 apocalypse on my family, however, I'd be lying if I didn't point out how that change took a lot of the discovery away from the Foundation. I really don't like how people boil that game down to, yeah, the combat is amazing, but the story is trash. Like, no, there's definitely more contributing to its reputation than those two things. It's not an inherently bad inclusion, but I'm willing to bet there are a lot of small sections of this game you'd never find under the influence of an objective marker. After all, you're out of your comfort zone in an entirely new place, so it only stands to reason that you'd stumble around and uncover random troves and demon domains. On this playthrough, I spent a little extended time in the Blasted Tokyo section and did a side quest that brought me to this bunker in Shibuya, abandoned by all but the spirits who passed here and whatever demons remain. It's an unsettling spot I had to sit and take in for a moment because I'd never seen it before. Definitely the kind of place you'd get the masculine urge to bleed out and die in. And I should mention, this was just for a side quest. Now, it's not like I'm saying the challenge quests are the best thing since taking Amara to the rear or anything, but they certainly beat the side quests you get in the average RPG that mostly amount to boring fetch quests, though I suppose there are some in this game that are literally just that. More often than not, though, they serve to add more depth to the world building as a whole by giving insight into the people who live in it. Navarre is sort of this school bully type of character. They gave Liam O'Brien a check and told him to yap about superiority because he's a lecturer and you're not. After his meddling with what was supposed to be a friendly competition turns into a situation that almost cost him his life though, his name is disgraced, and for most people, that's the last you see of him. Bro really thought he was on the team. However, at a much later point, you can take a request to escort a man to Cafe Florida in Tokyo to get away from the demons. This man turns out to be an older, downtrodden Navarre. Okay, so there's this strange time discrepancy between Tokyo and Mikado explaining Navarre's older appearance. There's a lot of lore stuff like that that never ends up becoming the main focus of the narrative, but still gives you something to chew on when you do eventually pick up on it. Anyway, Navarre doesn't even recognize Flynn, but when they arrive to their destination, he thanks him, stating that he must be of lecturer birth. And he's not. But I still think it's neat to actually have to work to get some closure on his character, rather than it being a natural thing you do in the story. There are probably countless other quests or details like that I could name off, or haven't even seen myself yet. It might just be the greatest effort of giving every character some sort of purpose or some short story that you can come across. And that's really what this game is about. It's the history of these two places, the people living in them, and how opening up your world and seeing what's there broadens your view. I've debated with myself of how I want to handle talking about the lore of this game, but I think I've since realized it might be for the best to let you figure out these things for yourself. While there is a concrete plot to this game, most of the background behind all of it is never fully explained to you and can only be gleaned through certain bits of dialogue or side quests. It's as if the game is putting you directly into the shoes of Flynn, and what you see in your time in this world will influence how you want to shape it. And also it's cool because that means this game's script, and by that extent mine, won't be bloated with a huge lore dump, so that makes my job easier. This is best seen through the alignment representatives, Jonathan and Walter. Who could have guessed? The game never attempts to hide that these two will butt heads eventually. It's like a celebrity marriage. As stated previously, Jonathan is a lecturer and Walter is a casualty like Flynn. Already, there's a major difference between these two in their class and upbringing. Jonathan is like a youth group friend. He's very well-meaning and a good-hearted person at his core who, despite his class, doesn't look down on those considered lesser, unlike somebody like Navarre. Walter comes from a family of fishermen, but doesn't want to live confined to that lifestyle just because he was born into it. It's only when these two begin to witness the way of the world in Tokyo, as well as the shadiness of Mikado and the monastery, that their views begin to evolve. Jonathan takes the label unclean ones to heart and sees Tokyo as nothing more than a society of unadulterated chaos that seeks to disrupt the order of Mikado. Order which has never made his life any worse, so it must be worth preserving. Even if it means wiping those who refuse to conform off the face of the planet. Walter sees the way Tokyo is governed, or, well, the lack thereof, as an opportunity for anyone to take their life into their hands, regardless of status, despite the risks that come from dismantling the current structure. This is pretty basic SMT law versus chaos, Bloods versus Crips affair. What makes 4 different, though, is how, instead of the representatives of these alignments building their views off of what they see in one world, they essentially have 2 that completely contrast one another and see the other as a threat. Jonathan begins to view this side of the world as unorderly and inhumane when compared to the peace and prosperity of Mikado. However, Walter, who never had the same privileges as him in his upbringing, views the way of Tokyo as the method of breaking the inequality and stagnation of Mikado. These disagreements begin to pile up until they decide their opposing views are a threat to the future. The game actually makes you side with one of the two. This is some time before the alignment lock, but it serves as a taste of what you really stand for. Do you want to fight for a world where peace is guaranteed at the cost of your freedom and the eradication of those who don't comply with the status quo? Or live in a world embroiled in chaos where anyone can stake their claim if they have the strength to do so? The endings in this game are some of the most extreme displays of law and chaos in the entire series. Viewing them side by side is like taking 5 minutes to scroll Blue Sky, and then the next 5 on 4chan. Which I guess that would make the white ending Twitter, and neutral would be, the great outdoors. The game spends its final hours showcasing what these ideas can eventually lead to, and asks the player if they want this. It's very much a you get what you ask for situation. Depending on your dialogue choices throughout the game, it might be too late to switch over to the other side, but unlike other games, there's actually an alternative option always available when the alignment lock begins. Flynn is shown the worlds of blasted and infernal Tokyo through the Yamato Perpetual Reactor, byproducts of law and chaos and how each is unsustainable. A world of law yearns for freedom, and a world of chaos yearns for security. It's a destructive loop that appears to only have one way to be broken, and that's the white ending. This ending insists that only through the total annihilation of the world as we know it can we truly be free from pain. At least that's what the white would have you believe. They're blatant embodiments of nihilism, and the white girl ending is the product of giving into that destructive worldview. However, much like Law and Chaos, the white ending has its own parallel. That being, doing things our own way.
Kill yourself!
The neutral ending is one of the biggest points of contention among detractors of this game, and a quick glance at it gives you a lot of reasons why. Why is this file called Hitler Game Design? Neutral is the hardest ending to get, requiring you to be on a specific point of the alignment chart, much like when you do a political compass test in front of the wrong group of friends. On top of that, you get dumped with an assload of side quests that you're required to do in order to actually achieve this ending. And this ending requiring the most effort to get, alongside the ending being framed as the best one, kinda gives the others the reputation that they're not as important. There comes a time in every gamer's life where they play a game with multiple endings and get the worst one on their first playthrough, and it's hardly ever a pretty sight. I know the pain because I got Silent Hill 1's worst ending whenever I played that game, and I had to restart Persona 1 because it also has an out-of-nowhere bad ending depending on dialogue options. Just as a heads up, if you fight this bear, it's over. You can thank me later. I fluctuated a lot throughout my first playthrough, leaning towards chaos for most of it, but I still ended up being Catholic enough to end up on neutral on my first playthrough. Getting funneled into this mess without any knowledge of how it works makes the endgame a giant pain in my PP. And what didn't help was I got misinformed by a friend of how it works. Unlike the rest of the endings, neutral requires you to complete or have already completed 18 specific side quests after the alignment lock. I was told you have to do all of them. The following few days, I spent my free time after work grinding out side quests, collecting random junk, getting the power to fly across the world, fighting this version of Beelzebub that has the integrity of a me gunner player in Smash Bros, and looking up GameFAQs message boards from a decade ago to find out where to even receive certain quests, since the agencies don't just dump all of the ones you need to complete on you. No, go back to this random NPC in an area you visit one time so that then you can get the option to accept the request. This random person on GameFAQs is getting at least $5 of my inheritance, and I didn't realize my error until I only had that one left. Needless to say, I didn't make that same mistake this time. I hated that first experience for a multitude of reasons, but it was a major character building moment for me, and despite some of the more miserable parts about it, that experience granted me a perspective on neutral I wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm just going to up and say it. The neutral ending is overhated. I'm going to go through some of the common talking points about why people dislike this ending and why I disagree with them. Neutral being the best ending completely devalues the other three. No. Not really. Like, yeah, the other three are absolutely worse outcomes, but their existence shows you the negatives of law and chaos in this world, pulling no punches. It'd actually be detrimental if the game went out of its way to explore these opposing views, but not give you the option to actually enforce them. It's nothing but a net positive that the game shows you what can come as a result of them and still asks, is this what you want? Do you think this is the right thing despite the negatives? Like I said, I was leaning towards chaos on my first playthrough, not considering the harm it would cause until the Infernal Tokyo segment. There are literally people called nourishers there who serve under the demi-humans. Oppression still exists in that world, with the only difference being how your standing is dictated by strength as opposed to class. I'd like to touch on this specific point later because it's important to the overall theme here. This is something that goes for all games though. Bad outcomes are not worthless. In this case, they're cautionary warnings of radical views going too far, and showing us the bad is just as valuable, if not arguably more important than showing us the good. Neutral having more content completely devalues the other three. Okay, so white having no content to it should be self-explanatory, since that ending is just looking at the state of humanity and going, fuck it! Regarding the other two, though, neutral doesn't even have a lot of exclusive content. Most of the quests that you have to do to proceed with the route still exist on the other two. In fact, there are actually side quests exclusive to locking into the Law and Chaos routes. Hell, there are even ones on New Game Plus to further incentivize you to see every ending on repeat playthroughs. Neutral doesn't even have a unique final dungeon or final boss either. You just do the Chaos and Law ones respectively back to back. This is kind of a lose-lose situation, because if you do give this route a unique final boss or dungeon, it gives the critics of it further ammunition to claim neutral favoritism. But with the way it is now, I can see some thinking it's pretty lame there's no true final boss. I don't really mind the way it is personally, but I can see some being disappointed. However, if the point was not to lean too hard into the neutral bias, which yes, it's kind of hard to say there isn't at least a little bit, the way it is now was the best outcome. Neutral bias exists, it's bad, and this ending contributes to that. Okay, so this one's a bit tricky. This is a complaint I hear about the series as a whole, since there's a perceived neutral bias throughout most of the franchise, or on multiple occasions have been endings that compare much more favorably to the others in a particular game. Personally, I've always seen neutral as a double-edged sword in the games I've played. It's often overlooked how, yes, while neutral can be a good middle ground that places faith in humanity to overcome their struggles without the influence of a higher power, failing to pick a side can also lead to inaction that only delays an inevitable return to these ideological battles. Strange Journey is probably the best example of that. That whole game gives you very little reason to have faith in humankind to improve without a major shift in the world, so while you still have the option to place hope in them anyway, you can infer that by doing so, you're dooming the world to be put into an endless cycle of dealing with that same threat over and over again. That's a pretty stark and depressing way to put it, yet totally appropriate for the themes of the game, and goes to show that neutral isn't always the right option. No alignment is a singular mold. They're adaptable and can mean different things, and I think boiling down neutral as just a middle finger to your other options isn't quite right. So in that case, where does SMT4's neutral route land on this spectrum? Is it a route where you say, I think both sides are stupid and retain the status quo because at least I don't play sides? Well, no, because that would be Devil Survivor 2 you're thinking of. I know that sounds goofy to say considering the route is literally called neutral, but think about what you do to get here in the first place. In preparation for this playthrough, I wanted to get neutral and make Flynn into an enlightened centrist in the process. However, when looking through how each dialogue choice affects your alignment, I quickly noticed that there are hardly any instances in which you don't shift your alignment in some way. Throughout the game, you're consistently asked which side you take in a two-sided argument. Some of these can greatly change your alignment, whether it's the tunnel segment at the end of the Ring of Gaia, which even Walter and Jonathan don't know which way they lean during that final question, or the split between those two that happens afterwards. You can't abstain from this. You have to pick one to side with. When a neutral option is available, you're often poked fun at for making it.
That's pretty pathetic. Can't you even form your own opinion?
If you were told that you must live here in Tokyo, do you think that you could? So you can't even form an opinion when asked a question. Pitiful.
The game itself is aware that not having an opinion on important issues like the ones Mikado and Tokyo face doesn't help solve them. You can't save the world by just saying, I believe both sides are dumb, because that doesn't contribute to progression. I don't care which ending you prefer because there are interesting things to dissect about each of them, but framing neutral as an ending that doesn't accomplish anything solely because you assumed what it was about because of the name and not what you do to get it is not smart. It takes someone who can see the good and bad in all situations and get opposing people to unite and make compromises for one another to build a brighter future, rather than just leaning one way specifically the entire time. The necessity to do challenge quests at the end is a way to help out everyone and bring them together, because otherwise Flynn would just be killing the leaders of the two factions that are actually going to change things, and the people of Tokyo wouldn't really have much of a reason to respect him. He'd just be a random guy from Mikado. Because he went out of his way to help them out, he's seen as a shining star of hope for the people of Tokyo. And he certainly doesn't have some fence up his ass. In fact, in the ending, Isabeau actually convinces the people of Mikado to move down to Tokyo when the two plan to get Masakado to remove the firmament that's been separating the two societies for a very long time. That's probably the most unrealistic part about this route. I have no idea how she was able to convince what we're led to believe is the entirety of a nation to leave their homes behind, to move to a shithole, and then watch their old home get destroyed. She would have never had a chance if the firmament was on top of France instead. Regardless, that's quite literally breaking the status quo. These two groups of people who were separated a long time ago have been brought back together again. And with how behind Mikado was with the times, the citizens are eager to learn all about the new place they're in. However, there's still a harsh reality behind a situation such as this. It's hard to unite those who've been separated for so long. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, effort, and bloating your 3DS activity log. What happens to Jonathan and Walter, though, hurts me more than the conclusions of any other alignment reps, and maybe I just say that because you spend more time with them than any other, but they commit so hard to their newfound ideals that they throw away their humanity in the process. And what Jonathan says to Flynn before his fight breaks my heart, dude. Jonathan was a lecturer, but he had no tolerance for classism if his opinion of Navarre was anything to go by, and yet he doesn't hesitate to throw those morals away because Flynn doesn't share his ideals.
Why can you not see God's affection for us? Perhaps because you are nothing but a human born of common stock after all.
Depending on how you see it, Walter arguably gets a worse fate. He makes it very clear he no longer wants to get walked on. He wants to show the world he has the strength it takes to make something of himself, no matter his current status. And while I do want to believe him and Lucifer are acting symbiotically, there's something incredibly ironic about Walter fusing with him, only to be left as his deformed, disgusting left hand. Ironic in the sense that this whole time he fought for a world where strength matters above all else, and yet I can only see this as him being the first person to get walked on in a world like that. That's just my interpretation, though. I used to really dislike this ending, the process of getting it in a gameplay sense, that is. By the time I had done everything and that final cutscene was rolling by, a part of me was disappointed that there wasn't a proper final boss and that the ending was really short or whatever, but during that last cutscene, I realized that at the end of the day, I fought tooth and nail for this. There were plenty of hardships along the way that needed to be endured, but it was all worth it in the end because I knew that reforging that severed connection helped birth something brand new that day. If the white ending is about nihilism, the neutral ending is about hope. Hope is not steady. Hope is not easy to hold on to. Hope does not guarantee a prosperous future. For all we know, Tokyo could fall back into turmoil once again one day, but I want to believe that after what we went through to get here, Flynn laid the groundwork for a better tomorrow. And, well, it sure as hell beats not even trying.
Thanks.
Shin Megami Tensei 4 is by no means the best game in its series, but it put me through a trial like no other. It showed me how these games are a lot more than the general public give them credit for, and that they're less about cruelty and killing your friends and God or whatever, and more about realizing who you are and making your place in a brutal world. I've since played most of the other games I was really interested in, and it has become one of my favorite RPG series with how much is explored in each title. On top of that, each of these games managed to set themselves apart from one another, so even though I could name off at least 3 or 4 other games in the same franchise that undoubtedly in my mind have better gameplay than this one, 4 still sets itself apart because of how it ties in its world, characters, and gameplay to build an engrossing experience, the likes of which I had no idea existed on this platform. I didn't have the most solid opinion at first, but now I realize just how important experiences such as my first run through the neutral ending were to understanding the full scope of this game's themes. And plus, now, I can get through it a lot faster, so that certainly helps. I do think it's important to state that if you've ever been hesitant about trying one of these games out due to their reputation online, don't be. They have a different appeal from other RPGs on the market, but more importantly, I believe games that challenge your perception of the world and your tenacity are always valuable. It's shit like this that really builds character. And I think maybe, just maybe, by peering into this world, you'll come out the other end learning just a little bit more about your own. And also, I really don't think Apocalypse fixed smirking.